Welcome to Mindset Mondays, the weekly bite-sized podcast designed to build a happier, healthier headspace. Think of it as a learning snack for your morning commute to set your week up right. I'm Mark Holloway, and today we're going somewhere that I think is genuinely one of the most underexplored reasons people stay stuck. We talk a lot on this show about mindset, about fear, about perfectionism, about purpose. But there's something that runs underneath all of those things, a layer deeper, and it's this: the story you have about who you are. Not who you want to be, not who you're working toward, but who you believe you fundamentally are right now at your core. Because here's the thing, most people don't fail to change because they lack information, motivation, or opportunity. They fail to change because the change they're trying to make doesn't match their identity. They don't see themselves as the kind of person who does that thing. Today, we're talking about the identity gap, the distance between who you think you are and who you're actually capable of becoming. What creates it, why it keeps so many people stuck, and most importantly, how to start closing it. Let's get into it. Let me start with a scenario that I think will feel familiar. Someone decides they want to get fit. They buy the trainers, they download the app, they go to the gym 3 times in the first week. Then something comes up. A busy week at work, a late night, a social commitment. They miss a few sessions and the internal voice kicks in. See, you're just not a gym person. You never stick at things. This is just who you are. Or someone wants to start their own business. They have the idea, they feel the excitement, but when it comes to actually doing the uncomfortable things, pitching the idea, putting themselves out there, charging for their work, something holds them back. Not fear exactly, more like a quiet sense that this isn't really for people like me. Or someone wants to become more confident, assertive version of themselves, but every time they try to show up that way, it feels fake. It feels like a performance, like they're pretending to be someone they're not. All 3 of these examples have the same root cause: the person's identity, their deep-seated belief about who they are, is in conflict with the behaviour they're trying to adopt. This is the identity gap. The gap between who you currently believe yourself to be and who you need to become to live the life you actually want. And here's what makes it so powerful and so insidious at the same time. Your brain is constantly working to keep your behaviour consistent with your identity. It's not trying to sabotage you. It's trying to protect you from the discomfort of being someone you don't recognise as yourself. The problem is that the identity you're protecting was often formed long before you had any say in the matter. Most of our core beliefs about who we are were formed in childhood and early adolescence, not through considered reflection, but through repeated experience and the messages we absorbed from the people around us. A teacher who said you weren't academic, a parent who told you that you weren't sporty or creative or good with money, a peer group that positioned you as the funny one, the quiet one, the sensible one. Labels that felt descriptive at the time, but became prescriptive over time. Psychologists call this the self-concept, the collection of beliefs you hold about yourself across different domains: intelligence, social ability, competence, creativity, worthiness. And research consistently shows that we behave in ways that are consistent with our self-concept, even when that self-concept no longer serves us. One of the most compelling studies on this comes from the work of psychologist William Swan at the University of Texas. Swan's research on what he calls self-verification theory found that people actively seek out information that confirms their existing self-view, even when that self-view is negative. In one study, people with low self-esteem actually preferred feedback that confirmed their negative self-image over positive feedback that contradicted it. Not because they enjoyed feeling bad about themselves, but because consistency feels safer than uncertainty. Think about how profound that is. Given the choice between feeling good about themselves and feeling consistent, people chose consistent. This is why simply telling yourself you're confident or successful or capable without doing the deeper identity work rarely sticks. The affirmation bounces off an identity that doesn't match. And this is also why when people do genuine lasting change, it rarely happens through willpower alone. It happens through an identity shift, a fundamental update to the story they tell about who they are. The writer and researcher who articulated this most powerfully in recent years is James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, one of the best-selling books of the last decade, having sold over 20 million copies worldwide. Clear's central argument is that people who approach change the wrong way. They focus on outcomes. I want to lose weight. I want to write a book. I want to build a business. Or they focus on, I'll go to the gym 4 times a week. I'll write 500 words a day. Both of these are useful, but neither is as powerful as focusing on identity. The most effective level of change, Clear argues, is asking who is the kind of person who would achieve this outcome, and then beginning to act as that person, not waiting until you've achieved the result to claim the identity, but claiming it incrementally through evidence. His example is simple but brilliant. 2 people trying to quit smoking. Someone offers them a cigarette. The first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." The second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." The words are similar, but the identity being reinforced is completely different. The first person still sees themselves as a smoker trying to resist. The second has begun to rewrite who they are. Clear calls this casting votes for your identity. Every time you take an action consistent with who you want to become, you cast a vote for that identity. You don't need to win in a landslide on day 1. You just need to start accumulating votes. Over time, the evidence mounts and the identity shifts. Kobe Bryant is a remarkable example of this in action. Bryant was known, almost obsessively, for his identity as the hardest worker in the locker room. This wasn't just a piece of self-promotion, it was a core belief he built evidence for day after day, year after year. He famously trained at 4 a.m. long before his teammates arrived. When people asked why, his answer was always some version of, "This is who I am." He didn't train hard because he felt motivated. He trained hard because it was consistent with his identity. The motivation followed the identity. Serena Williams is another powerful example. In interviews, she has spoken about how she learned to see herself not just as a tennis player, but as the greatest tennis player in the world, and how holding that identity, especially during long stretches of injury and setback, shaped how she trained, how she competed, and how she recovered. She didn't wait to win 23 Grand Slams before claiming the identity. She claimed the identity and let her actions follow. Let's get specific about the kinds of identity labels that tend to hold people back, because most of us are carrying some version of these. I'm not a morning person. I'm terrible with money. I'm not very creative. I'm an introvert. I find social situations draining. I'm not academic. I'm someone who struggles with their weight. I'm not the kind of person who takes risks. Now, some of these might have a basis in reality. We are all genuinely different. Personalities vary. Preferences vary. But there's a critical difference between I currently find mornings difficult and I'm not a morning person. The first is a description of your current state. The second is a verdict on your nature. And once something becomes part of your identity, your brain defends it. It filters information to confirm it. It steers your choice to protect it. It makes the label self-fulfilling. The psychologist Carol Dweck, whose work we explored in episode 22 on growth mindset, describes this beautifully. She says the fixed mindset isn't just about believing intelligence is fixed. It's about believing that your fundamental characteristics define you. And when your characteristics define you, you stop seeing them as things that can change. The identity gap is, in many ways, a fixed mindset about the self. The good news? Identities can be rewritten. Not overnight, not through a single declaration, but through consistent, intentional, accumulated evidence that starts with catching the labels you're wearing and asking whether they're still true or whether they were ever yours to begin with. Here's some science that I find genuinely reassuring. The brain is not fixed. We've talked about neuroplasticity before on this show, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways in response to new experiences and behaviours. But what's particularly relevant here is research on how identity itself is stored and updated in the brain. Your sense of self is processed largely in the medial prefrontal cortex, a region that's also deeply connected to memory, decision-making, and social processing. What research by neuroscientists, including Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, has shown is that the brain treats threats to your identity with the same neural response as physical threats. This is why identity challenges feel so uncomfortable. They're registering as a kind of danger. But here's the flip side. The brain's plasticity means that identity is not hardwired. Every time you act in a way, every time you cast what James Clear calls a vote for a new identity, you are, at the neurological level, building new associations about who you are. The brain updates its model of the self through experience. You are not locked into who you've been. You are always in the process of becoming. The most inspiring examples of this in the real world aren't always the most famous, but some well-known figures illustrate it powerfully. Matthew McConaughey spent much of his early career being typecast as the romantic comedy leading man. By his mid-30s, he was struggling to get taken seriously, struggling with his sense of purpose and at a creative low. He made a radical decision. He turned down every romantic comedy offer, even at significant financial cost, and waited for dramatic roles. He spent 18 months with almost no income. He was effectively betting on a new identity: serious actor. The result was a string of critically acclaimed performances, an Oscar win for Dallas Buyers Club, and what became known as the McConaissance. He didn't wait to be offered a new identity. He chose it and backed it. Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks as we know it, grew up in a housing project in Brooklyn. The identity assigned to him by his circumstances, by poverty, by limited expectations, was not one that included building a global empire. He has spoken extensively about the moment he chose to rewrite that story, not through blind optimism, but through a deliberate decision not to be defined by where he started. Arnold Schwarzenegger is perhaps one of the most extreme examples. He arrived in America with almost no money, barely speaking English, having grown up in rural Austria. He went on to become the world's most famous bodybuilder, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and the governor of California. In his memoir, he describes how at each stage he claimed the next identity before he had earned it: bodybuilding champion, actor, politician, but then did the work to back it up. These aren't people who had unusual abilities. They had an unusual willingness to rewrite who they believed they were. So, as always, let's try and make this practical. 2 shifts you can take this week. Mindset shift 1. Audit your identity labels. Set aside 15 minutes this week, journal or just think, and ask yourself, what are the labels I'm currently wearing about myself? Write them down and make sure you're honest. Include the things you say about yourself as jokes, because the laugh often masks a genuine belief. Oh, I'm useless with technology. I'm terrible at sport. I've never been very organised. For each label, ask 3 questions. 1. When did I first start believing this about myself? Where did it come from? 2. Is this actually still true? Is it based on current evidence or old experience? And 3. Is this label serving me or limiting me? You don't have to throw every label out. Some of them are accurate, some of them are neutral, some are even useful. But doing this audit gives you conscious choice over the beliefs you carry, rather than unconsciously hauling around a suitcase that was packed by someone else decades ago. Mindset shift 2. Act as if. Cast 1 vote for your new identity this week. Pick one thing you're trying to become, one dimension of the person you want to be. Maybe it's someone who takes their health seriously, someone who speaks up in meetings, someone who writes, someone who sets boundaries, someone who shows up for themselves. Now, this week, do one thing that person would do. Not a massive thing, not a life overhaul, one thing, one vote for that new identity. Go for the run, even though you don't feel like an athlete yet. Send the email you've been avoiding, even though you don't feel like a confident communicator yet. Say no to something that drains you, even though you feel like someone who has boundaries yet. And when you do it, notice how it feels. because what you're doing is gathering evidence. You're updating your self-concept one data point at a time. You are, in the most literal sense, becoming someone new. The gap between who you think you are and who you're capable of being isn't closed in a moment. It's closed one small deliberate act at a time. But start this week. So, let's round things up. Your identity is not your destiny. It's your current story, shaped by experiences, messages, and environments that mostly predate your ability to choose them. The research is clear. We behave consistently with who we believe we are, but the most powerful insight is that belief itself can be updated. Identity isn't fixed. It's built through evidence, through action, through the accumulation of small, consistent choices that say, this is who I'm becoming. You don't have to wait until you've arrived to claim the identity. You claim the identity and let your actions follow. This week, audit your labels, cast one vote for your new self. Thank you for being here. If this episode resonated, please share it with one person who needs to hear it, and I'll see you next Monday.